Welcome to this Nation Outside training on organizing, advocacy, and community engagement. I am thrilled and excited to be here. My name is Hakim Crampton. I am the Movement and Capacity Building Specialist for Just Leadership USA. Just Leadership USA is a national organization whose motto is those closer to the problem are those closer to the solution, but are furthest from accessing resources and power to actually change, bring about a change in the community. So invested in the development and leadership development of advocates, of people who have been directly impacted that they can reside within. And the organization's aim is to
can you mute Nicole? I'm sorry. Thank you.
The organization's aim and objective is to help other individuals move their communities further and closer to the goals of the objective of the organization, that is decarceration and giving people opportunities and access to equity and equality in America and in the communities in which they come from. And so this presentation is inspired by the Just Leadership theory of change and our overall mission to decarcerate. And so this advocacy and community engagement training, I want you to pay attention. I want you to take notes for those that will be watching at future dates. I want you to take very careful notes on any word and every word that is bolded, italicized, or highlighted, right? That is bolded, italicized, or highlighted. I want you to write all those words down. And if you find a word that is bolded or highlighted or italicized twice, just make a note, a number to it, three times if you see it three times, because I want you to build, you're going to be building a lexicon of language. You're going to be building a dictionary of advocacy language, of engagement language, of leadership training, of organizing training. You're going to build that. That is going to be critical when it comes to being able to actually articulate the aims and objectives of the missions and the work that you're engaged in. It's going to be important that you're very well-rounded and know the material. So first thing I want you to do is take a look at this picture. Take a look at this image and study this image. Images are powerful, right? Just as much as words are. And let's pay attention to this image because this is the organizer's journey, but it's not about the organizer, or it's not about the organization, but it's about why is a person organizing, right? What is prompting, what is inspiring this individual to be organizing, right? To be an organizer in the community, right? So this picture kind of tells a very important story that we'll really talk about. And if you really study the picture, and I'll leave it up for just a second, if you really study the picture, you'll learn some things and notice some very interesting things that we can clearly identify with and relate to in this work. Some things that we're passionate about, some of the reasons why we're passionate about it, right? Some of the people that are in our lives are in this image, right? Some of the things that have hurt us and harmed us are in these images, right? So the organizer's journey is organizing, weaving in and out of these issues, of this pain, of people's lives, right? Of systems that harm people, right? So organizer's journey. And if you remember the game Chutes and Ladders, it's kind of like Chutes and Ladders. To engage your community is a noble objective, and to give back to your community is a noble objective. So to get moving into action along the chutes and ladders, the ups and the downs and et cetera, right? The slide offs and et cetera, those things are important for us to understand how passionate and how important our passion is to get us through to the end. So this image really captures it, right? This story, it's an important story. So what are the principles of organizing and base building that leads to engagement? What are they, right? So the number one principle essentially would be the what, the who, and the when, right? To identify the issues, right? Identify the issues that are impacting the communities. What are the issues? Who is impacted by these issues? Who shares the same concerns as you about these issues? Because although we may share similarities, we both may be organizers, both may be passionate about something in our community, we may not share the same concerns. So if we don't share the same concerns, that means that likely we're not to join each other's campaigns. That means likely we're not to support each other. That doesn't mean we don't support each other at heart. That means that that I can't count on you and you can't count on me directly in your campaign or in your work, right? But find someone who does. So who does share your concerns, right? And then when can you get started? This is the principle number one, the what, the who, and the when. What are the issues? Who is impacted by the issues? Who shares the same concerns as you? And when can you get started? How quickly can you get involved in this campaign? Example for principle number one is the what, the who, and the why. I'm going to share with you a video, and it's going to run embedded in this clip. And in this video is one of Just Leadership's campaigns called Just Us, a campaign that was inspired by the COVID-19 crisis, which points to a larger issue, right? A larger advocacy issue. Because while COVID-19 is a critical issue right now, there was a broader issue behind COVID-19, and that COVID-19 broader issue for people directly impacted by the criminal justice system is the failure of the criminal justice system, prisons, jails, federal and state institutions to have an actual emergency evacuation plan for people that are incarcerated. Should there be a crisis like a tornado, fire, or COVID-19, right? There's no evacuation plan. So the Just Us campaign was inspired by the overall broad implications of what happens to people when there's not emergency plans in play to deal directly with very specific issues. Like, for example, when people crafted laws and policies and women, laws and policies to incarcerate people, what about women who could potentially be incarcerated, who could be pregnant at the time of their incarceration? No one really thought about what to do when we have a woman who is pregnant. And so new laws and policies, emergency laws need to come in effect to say, wait a minute, this individual who is currently in threat of being incarcerated is currently pregnant, right? Especially if someone is currently no one should be going to trial while pregnant, right? No one should be in jail, pre-trial detainee while pregnant, right? They should be out on bail at home with their families being cared for by medical doctors. So what we're saying is that no emergency plans were in play for emergency crisis situations. So this video is our Just Us campaign that pivots the need for emergency medical crisis. Now, the reason I'm showing you this video right now is because this video is going to set the stage for the number one principle in engagement is the what, the who, and the when, right? And so that's when you answer those questions, and when you can answer that fourth part is when can I get started? This is how a campaign inspires people to get started. So this quick video, it's not that long, and then we'll follow up and talk after that. Hold on, the video. Let me start over because I had it on mute.
Everyone in the United States is facing a health crisis. A crisis that has already killed so many and is getting worse. And for those incarcerated, the risk is even greater. Emergency management in prisons and jails where people live and work together has always been overlooked. Because of this, incarcerated people have always been the most vulnerable to pandemics, natural disasters, and climate change. When Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, there was an evacuation plan for stray cats and dogs, but not for incarcerated people. Neglecting the safety of millions of incarcerated people and people who work in correctional facilities during times of crisis is a denial of human rights. This failure to protect disproportionately Black and brown incarcerated people demonstrates the United States' 400-year legacy of slavery and discrimination, and it also reflects how marginalized people and communities are still abused in the United States today. The truth is, states have no plans to save the lives of incarcerated people. And yet their emergency plans rely on exploiting the labor of those incarcerated. This has to stop. Just Leadership USA has launched the Just Us campaign, comprised of federal and state-based policies that focus on decarceration and safety. Just Us is a national call for policymakers to acknowledge the human dignity of people on the inside. These recommendations require all pipelines of the criminal justice system, from courts to jails to law enforcement, to act in sync to decarcerate and to provide proper access to emergency supplies, medical treatment, and education to those still inside to save lives. In order to create an equitable system, the voices of those most impacted must be centered. No one deserves to die behind bars. Your voice is needed to protect the lives of those who cannot speak for themselves. Everyone in the United
Engagement. Who will join your campaign? These are some of the first questions that we must ask as we begin to engage our community. Who will join your campaign? And this should consist of a list. You should begin writing down a list and begin naming individuals. Who will join your campaign? Who is on your side? Who are you trying to convince? Or in other words, move with your campaign? Also, who are your opponents? Another way of looking at this is the SWOT analysis. What are some of your strengths, right? What are some of your weaknesses? What are some of the opportunities that present themselves? And what are some of the threats that can get in your way? So there's the who of engagement. So what is your theory of change? At this stage, I would propose to you to develop in your mind that what is your theory of change, or what is your framework for your own advocacy? Meaning that when you discover what you're passionate about, what impacts you or your family, what does that look like? If you were to write that out in a sentence or a statement of what the world would look like, or what your community would look like, or what your family would look like, or what your life would look like if the change occurred that you sought, right? What would that look like? So this is the stage that as we begin developing a campaign and asking those questions of the who to engage, right? The who would join us, the who will support us, who is against us. We have to develop the theory of change in our mind, because this is when we go to these people, when we go to our support-based network, people that would join our campaign, we must be able to engage them in a shared vision. And our theory of change, if we want a better community, a brighter community, or a better family, we want to be able to articulate that so that someone else could say, yes, I want that for my community too. I feel the same way. I share that same concern. I share that same value. That's what your theory of change should describe. Now, here's Just Leadership's theory of change. This isn't a mission statement, but it's our theory of change. We are committed to educating, investing, and supporting the leadership of those most impacted by discriminatory policies, to empower them with the tools they need to be more effective advocates, to drive national and local policy change, and better organize supporters in their own communities. That's our theory of change that amplifies our mission statement. Our mission statement says that those closest to the problem are those closest to the solution, but they are furthest from the power and resources. Our theory of change our organization says that we're going to invest in the leadership, in the development, by educating and supporting those that are most directly impacted in their community, so that they can develop the tools and the resources and fight, so to speak, in the war and the battle for equity and change, so that they will have the capacity to actually bring about change in their community. That's our theory of change. Our theory of change is that we as an organization will invest in others and contribute and develop others' leadership so that they can go back to their communities and be the change makers in their community, right? So that's a theory of change. What is your theory of change? Now, how we invest in that, how that matriculates for an organization like Just Leadership is we invest in leaders by inviting them to what's called an emerging leaders. So we engage current leaders on the ground who are interested in advocacy, who want to learn more about advocacy, who are passionate about issues but haven't yet emerged into the leadership scene, haven't developed the skills yet, haven't networked with other organizers like themselves. And so we invest in them and have them partake in 1 or 2 day leadership development training. That turns into actually then following up with putting those practices, those leadership skills into practice, right? Getting involved in actually now becoming change agents in your community, to lead a local campaign or to invest in your own community, you know, within 6 months to a year. And then you become an impactful leader at the later stage, because now you're continuing to grow and network as you understand that the issues you're fighting for are actually issues that other communities are fighting for across the nation. So that your campaign and your issue that you are passionate about, maybe because something inspired you down the street from you or in your own household, you notice that it's connected all over the country, and there's other advocates advocating for the same thing, who have developed power in their communities, who have used their voice to bring about change, and you're able to then network with them and elevate your campaign, your issues to the national level from a local level, right? To help reduce incarceration, et cetera. And this is our theory of change, that if we invest in leaders, in emerging leaders, they become greater leaders on a local, national level, leading campaigns, and then they become actual national leaders, so to speak. If not national leaders, the work that they does has national implications and national impact. And that's our theory of change for our organization. We invest in leaders so that that becomes the result. So when you're developing your campaign, you're wanting to engage your community, maybe it's tutoring, maybe it's cleanup in your neighborhood, maybe it's changing laws in your local municipality. Whatever they are, you're going to develop a theory of change around the issues that impact you, the who, the what, and the when, right? So now, principle 2, after you develop the what, when, the who, you're going to begin to strategize. It's important that no successful organization or event can really be truly successful without some form of strategization. It's critical at the base building level, right? Because you have to analyze the political landscape. And there's an italicized word, right? You're gonna have to analyze the political landscape of your community to know who is who, what's what issues are important at the political level. Are there any issues at the political level, at the local elected political level, that the community is not interested in, or the community is being neglected in, or there's no voice at the community level for what's happening at the local level, and vice versa, right? What powers will you need to build and achieve success in your campaign, right? And what we mean by powers is wide and varied, right? Powers are perhaps tools and assets that people have, skill sets that they have, networks, all right? People power, right? Financial resources are also power. There's a lot of different powers that come into play. So what powers will you need to build and achieve success in your campaign? These are questions, right, that you're going to have to strategize about. Is it the city or county council or commission or governor? Is it the judicial bench? Is it the judgeship? Is it the prosecutor's office, right? Who has power? Who do you need to influence? Who do you need to network with? You need to have a strategy about how to do that, how to reach the city if it's going to go through the city. Who can talk to the city on your behalf if you're not the best one suited to talk to the city, right? Who can get to the governor if you need to get to the governor? How do you get to the governor? These are questions that an effective advocate or organizer would need to develop if they're going to build a successful engagement plan. You have to familiarize yourself and the community with the issues you're advocating. So listen, the first part of that is familiarize yourself. That means if you're advocating for an issue, you need to know what those issues are. What are the numbers? What is the data? Who's advocating for it? Who's in support of it? Who's against it? You must familiarize yourself and the community with the issues you're advocating. So as you familiarize yourself, you must begin educating the community, right? So that you have to have your facts straight, your information straight. You have to play devil's advocate as you build your information so that you know when people oppose you, you know what your opposition is gonna say, right? That's part of a SWOT analysis. What would they say? who is going to be against you, right? Familiarize yourself so that you can advocate effectively to your community and win your community over to your campaign. Who's the power source that will oppose you? Now, this is a different question because some people can oppose you, but they don't present a power that can oppose you, right? They can present a voice, but is that voice powerful, right? So the question is, who's the power source that will oppose you and will oppose your issues, right? And who will be in your favor of the issues? So what power will be in your favor? You have to have a strategy about connecting to those power bases and being able to defend against those power bases. Principle 3, the most important part, of course, which every part is critical, but implementation. How are you going to implement your strategy, right? First and foremost, anyone who's planning talks about creating short and long-term goals, right? What are some of the short-term and long-term goals? Critical, what are the goals that are achievable, right? And when you're developing goals that are achievable, you must develop milestones that are markable, meaning that when you achieve, when you're working toward goals that you're achieving, right? Even if they're short-term, what does it take to get to that goal? So that means if it takes 3 steps to get to that goal, that means there's 3 milestones. You want to be able to mark those milestones as you move forward in your short-term goal. Same way with your long-term goal. In your long-term goal is a part of your short-term goal. So that means you would have 3 milestones plus your short-term goal, and then your bigger thing, what comes after your short-term goal, because you're leading up to your bigger long-term goal. So maybe there's 3 short-term goals, and each short-term goal has 3 milestones in the first one, 2 milestones in the second, maybe 10 milestones in the last one before you can begin to conclude in the final part of your long-term goal, right? And it just depends, and you have to build it. You have to build it like a vision board, right? So you're going to create short and long-term goals on the issues you're organizing around your plan, your strategy, right? And you're going to create a timeline to highlight your progress, right? So sometimes in nonprofit world, they call these measurable plans, plans that can be measured, right? And so it's critical that you develop a timeline so you can measure your own progress to know where you're at. So if you have a 2-year plan to get a bill passed, you want to know where you're at any given stage, so you know if you need to ramp up your pace or slow it down a little bit, right? And rethink things through. You need to define the resources your campaign will need in order to accomplish your goals. This is critical, right? And what it means by defining the resources is people need to clearly know what we have that is usable, right? That will help us achieve our goals. So if it's money, we need to know how much money we have. If it's food, we need to know how much food. If it's print material, marketing material, we need to know how much we have, right? If it's brochures, what about people power, people resources? We need to define the resources and say we have 10 volunteers and we have 8 staff. We need to define those resources, and why it's important to do that in the implementation part of the strategy is because if we're not clear on exactly what we have, it's like going to a work site where you're building a house and you don't have all of the tools clearly marked and defined that you need to build the structure, right? If you don't have all of the tools clearly defined and marked, you don't know what you got. So you can come to a work site and everything could be there, but it could be like a needle in a haystack because nothing is organized. A contractor and a plant manager, someone who's going to manage the entire plan of this building construction, he or she is going to need everything to be organized exactly where it should be and know exactly what's what. How many foremans do I have? How many cranes do I have? How many this and that do I have? That is critical and needed in the planning phases, because without that knowledge, we really don't know what power we have to implement our strategy. So that's very critical. Organizing action, or how you mobilize people. Mobilization brings organized people together for collective action. So how does that occur? Here are some great examples of how that occurs. You have community listening sessions, meaning you invite community members out and you ask them questions. What issues do you have? What concerns do you have? What do you fear is in your way? What support do you have? How can we help you? How can I help you? Etc. At community listening sessions. At town halls, very similar thing. Town halls, you would bring a joint conversation. You're asking people questions and you're coming to them with information, right? And you're sharing ideas and having a clear dialogue of the people, the stakeholders that are involved. Also canvassing, meaning that you're actually going out in the community. This is the true core base building part. That's why it's in the center of it, right? Because at the heart of base building is actually going door to door, knocking on doors, getting to know people, asking them questions, telling them why you're there, what you're passionate about, sharing your goals and ideas, what your theory of change is, right? And you're having a one-on-one conversation, more intimate, more personal. Then you have such things like outreach. Outreach could take on a wide variety of things. You could be doing mass mailings, for example. You could be attending public meetings, attending board meetings. You could be sending out emails, mass emails. There's a lot of ways to do outreach. You could attend church services and get on their agenda to speak and present. Another thing is social media. We know social media is a big, making flyers and demographics and one-pagers and sharing it, creating events and inviting people to your events, etc. Social media is critical to have dialogues, live discussions. And then there's direct actions, right? Marches, rallies, demonstrations, getting out there and getting the job done, right? At this time, I'm going to slow down and pause and see if there's any questions from anybody before I kind of move forward. I know we've kind of been speeding through. We've only been on here about 30 minutes or so, but I'm going to give anybody time that may be on the call. Any questions at this time?
I got a quick one, Hakim.
Yes, sir.
If you had to rate those actions you have listed in that slide, can you rate them 1 through 6, or would you say it depends on the circumstances?
Yeah, we could always rate them, and it does depend on the campaign, right? It depends on the level of engagement, because that's what we're talking about, engaging the community, right? And some campaigns are bigger than others. Some are simply, just my neighborhood block, right? And so what does that call for? Does that call for social media? You know what I'm saying? Does that call for a town hall? And I just need to talk to 4 people in my cul-de-sac, right? For example, or I just need to talk to the neighbors on my floor in my apartment building, right? Or I need to talk to my entire ward. So it does depend on the level of the engagement, or I should say the campaign. But if you're talking about the biggest, the broadest level of a campaign, you're really trying to make a huge community impact. I would always put canvassing as number 1, but that's why it's in the center of this, because it's the heart of it, right? Because canvassing is going door to door. If someone could come knock on my door and tell me that they're passionate about crime in the community and people breaking in cars, and if I'm also passionate about that, my car has been broken into, me and that person about to have the greatest conversation on the planet, right? But if you come to my house and I'm living well, I'm not in poverty, and you come to my door talking about we're doing mass bailouts of people that's in jail, we're trying to empty out the jail, and heck, I'm doing fine, and a matter of fact, I have a family member that was robbed and raped, and the person that got 7 years, and I felt they should have got life. Me and you might get in an argument, or I might not even open the door for you, right? And so it depends on the nature of the campaign. But at that canvassing level, when you have those contrasting potentialities, that is still the heart of an issue, because then you're able to report back and say that I talked to 100 people in my neighborhood and 80 supported it and 20 didn't. Remember in that previous slide, it's define the resources you got. When you're defining the support you have, You went door to door, you knocked on that door and they said, I'm sorry, Tony, I'm not interested, right? I'm sorry, Nicole, I'm not interested, right? Then you wrote that down as not interested. And you went to the next door and they said yes. And the next door and they said yes. And you can report those numbers out to your community and to the power bases that you're trying to influence and say, of my floor, there's 8 people who live on my floor in this apartment building. 7 of us said we want the noise to stop. One person said he loves the music, right? That makes a difference. So it does depend, but at the heart of it, canvassing is number one to me. And then community listening sessions will be number 2, because community listening sessions is where you invite the people to listen to them. You ain't coming to talk to them. Sometimes people need to be heard. When the issues are important to people, hear them out. Let them talk. They don't need to hear you talking and giving them statistics and data and talking about what your plan is for them. Hear them out. And especially if you are a person of power that's coming to listen to them, then you're going to be in a position to come and listen. They need your ears because they need you to transfer that information to others that can bring them the resources that they're telling you that they're missing, right? Who can bring them the safety that they feel that they don't have, right? And so you have to be a conduit. So canvassing, listening sessions, town halls, outreach, and then social media, right? And of course, direct actions are always the last thing you want to do, right? The last thing you want to do. And you have to almost do those other things to build up to direct actions, to really getting out there, marching and rallying. Sometimes, however, the final conclusion part, the direct rally and march, the demonstration, sometimes it starts there. Sometimes engagement begins spontaneous, spur of the moment. For example, some young man or young lady is killed by the law enforcement. No one strategized, no one planned, no one prepared, no one asked who has power to make a difference right now. Everyone in that moment who appeared at the scene in protest, in a demonstration, they walked right through this entire PowerPoint that I'm training you on now. They walked through this in their mind and their heart in that moment, and they got right to direct action right then and there on the spot. And from direct action, sometimes this PowerPoint training goes in reverse then, because the direct action leads to now more planning, more implementation of a real strategy to bring about the sustenance, meaning to sustain what brought about the demonstration, the change that the demonstration necessitated in that moment. If that answers your question.
There's one other question to Hakim.
Yes, sir.
You want me to read it to you, or can you see?
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if I can. Let me find it. See if I can find it.
I can read it.
Find the chat when I got the shared screen on.
No, I can read it to you.
Okay.
It says, how do you handle consistency in pushing out your theory of change as you work with a wide range of people? Basically, how do you keep people on point?
How do you keep people on point? Well, for one, you have to find out if people believe in your theory of change, right? And once you find out if people believe in your theory of change, those are the people that you focus on, helping you continue to build and sustain it, right? And how you do so is you continue to invest in others and playing their role and their responsibility in helping bring about that theory of change. You can't just have a theory of change and engage people in that theory of change and for them not also to have a sense of responsibility to bring about that change. So therefore, you have to invest in them, invest in their leadership, right? Invest in their development, invest in trust in their contribution to the theory of change, right? So that means that you might be doing a demonstration downtown Jackson, right? And Nicole may be in Ypsilanti and she down with the cause too, and she from Jackson, but she in Ypsi now. So guess what? She doing a demonstration there too. That's part of her investment, and we entrusting each other to go get it done. We've done that in the work that we've done around the state. We've, coordinated things at the same time and have entrusted, this is your responsibility and this is my responsibility, and believed enough in that theory of change to get that work done. So that's how I would answer that question. Oh, they're asking me. I'm here. I apologize, y'all. I'm currently on a facilitation with the with Nation Outside. I'll try to tap in if I can. My fault, y'all. I got two things going on at once. How you got engagement going on? Because we're trying to get women bailed out in time for Mother's Day, and that's the Michigan Mother's Day bailout. So we got to stay tapped in, and that's a critical part of this work. Is how to balance priorities. So now the next one is evaluation. Number 4, principle 4, organizing and base building. The success and challenges in your campaign assesses how much power you have to build within your community and coalition. So in the evaluation process, which is critical to the strategy being implemented and the success of it, is the SWOT analysis, right? And we saw that in the beginning, because you have to begin where you end, and you can only end where you begin, right? And so it's the same thing with, I just gave that example about the demonstration. If the demonstration begins with the demonstration, it still must go in reverse and go back to the beginning. And if it begins with the plan and execution of engagement and strategy, it would end in a demonstration. So likewise here at this point, the SWOT analysis, the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats. What strengths do we really have? And that's something we would have to write out and talk about. What strengths do we have as we engage each other, right? And be very transparent and honest about our weaknesses, you know? And so that means sometimes we have to say to people, you know, or we have to be honest about ourselves and say, perhaps I may be a weakness in this area. I may not be the best person in that area. Or you may have to identify someone and say, you know, I don't think you're best, you know, suited to go speak to the mayor, but I think you're more suitable to go talk to the 2 pastors from the church who got, you know, power over there to make this happen, right? So we have to be clear about what our weaknesses is. One of our weaknesses we don't have enough volunteers, right? So those are some of the examples. We don't have enough money. Weaknesses, we need more money, right? Opportunities. What are the opportunities that we have? Someone could say, for example, we're preparing and planning something. And so someone is planning something, a meeting in the community, and it's an opportunity for you to go speak there. That's an opportunity, right? An opportunity may present itself to where you're working on a reentry and a building just went up for sale, right? That's an opportunity. You're working on reentry. You need a place for people to reenter the community and have a place to stay. Now you found a building. That's an opportunity. An organization may have stepped on the scene and pushed to get a bill passed in a local community like yours. And you see that there's something you want to do. There's an opportunity, right? So you have to identify all types of opportunities that come your way, right? What are some of the threats? And this is different from weaknesses, right? What are some of the threats? Meaning that, what are some of the things that even with the weakness, you still could get by? Because you could have on a basketball court, you know, you could have a twisted ankle, but you can play your butt off and still get down. But you could have a threat that even with that twisted ankle, even with the strength of having the skill set, even with the opportunity to pass the ball down low to somebody, there's still a big threat. Maybe you're surrounded by 4 people now. And really the chances of you dishing to your opportunity, the chances of you hurting yourself on your weak ankle even more, or the chances of you using your skill set to get away is diminished because you're surrounded. Now that's a real threat, right? That's a real threat where something is actually preventing and blocking you from something, from moving forward. So you have to identify what are those things. If what you seek, if there's a law in play, then that is a clear threat to the success, right? There's a law that says, you know, you have to do 90% of your time in prison. And you got people in there that's got sentenced to 70 years in prison. So you mean to tell me they're gonna have to stay in prison for like 63 years? You know, is that what the case is? There's a law. So if you're gonna go engage the community to find out what type of support you have for helping people come home from prison after serving long, indeterminate prison sentences, right? You have to deal with the threat of the law. So if you're going to try to get the law changed, the only way that threat is absent is by the signing into law of a new law. And then that threat is removed. So you work through your strengths, your opportunities, your weaknesses and your opportunities in order to actually remove the threats that harm or hurt your community, because the threat is actually what's causing the harm. The threat is what you're passionate about changing. The threat is what has inspired you to get out there and fight for some cause or issue in your community. And the only way that you feel relief is when that threat is terminated, right? So that means when that law is changed, when that family member is brought home from jail or prison, right? When that person who is responsible for kidnapping and raping your family member is caught and tried and held, in the law of court for justice, etc. Whatever the case may be, whatever inspires you and moves you to engage the community, to base build and to seek a change in your community, that threat must be removed. But it has to be identified. It has to be identified. So, and why does it have to be identified? Because power concedes nothing without demand. It never did, and it never will. Nothing for us without us, right? And so actually at this stage of this training, it moves into another level of the training, right? A kind of like a part 2, because I really would have took more time on each of these slides and engaged more in conversation with you all had I had, a larger audience to really engage in. But for those that are watching, for those that watch this recording, there's an opportunity for you here, particularly with all of the words that was highlighted throughout this, that was italicized and bolded. Not only do you have a dictionary of base building and community advocacy and engagement, but you have really what I call a freestyle spoken word poem. When I used to do a lot of poetry, I used to have people write down words in the audience, and I used to take those words and bring them to the stage, and I used to read them in a flow. And they always had some form of flow to them because people were able to take different words and have envisioned in their mind different things, right? And how they apply and how the abstract realities of them. And so with definitions, when it comes to a nomenclature for advocacy work of this nature, they take on very technical terms, but at the same time, they still take on those varied meanings because there's implementation of how a word is used, right? Words have different shades of meanings, and this how we get passionate about certain things. So we talk about a demand, right? Sometimes a demand can be written on paper in a way that never uses the word demand, right? And sometimes a demand can be demanded without ever uttering the word, but through direct action, right? So again, the vocabulary in this presentation, in this training, when read as a poem, brings out the richness of this work and the vision of anybody who has a vision for a passion for change. So educate, elevate, and empower. These are the kind of the theory of change of just leadership. Educate, elevate, and empower. And in our theory of change, those are some of the very first words spoken, is to educate people that are directly impacted in order to elevate their work and to empower them to be effective in their work. So just leadership is building a national movement to decarcerate and decriminalize our communities. We will fight and we will win. So a part of our theory of change is having this powerful belief that we will win, right? And so defining a problem is a radical act, right? Standing up for change in your community and identifying that problem in the community is a radical act. Why? Because the legislative landscape is intentionally jargony and inaccessible because lawmakers do not want grassroots organizations to be able to effectively advocate for systems transformation. So when we stand up and define a problem in the community, it is a revolutionary act, right? A revolutionary act. So who are the power brokers and the stakeholders that actually impact or have a say-so regarding the powers that impact us. If you recall, a couple of weeks ago when we did our engagement training, the pre-training to this, these are some of the things I brought out in that training then. So the ecosystem of state politics, of course, starts at the top, or you can say from the bottom. The executive branch, the governor, the state agency and the housing authorities, the state legislators, the committees, the House of Reps and the Senate, your local government, your mayor, your city council, your county commissioners, your courts, your district attorneys, your prosecutors, your judges, and your employers, your faith leaders, your community groups, your nonprofits, your corporations, your for-profit businesses, et cetera, right? The power and stakeholders, the ecosystem of state politics. And you might ask, how does a faith leader, for example, or even a for-profit business, a corporation, a party store in the community, how are they a stakeholder in the ecosystem of state politics? That's a critical question to ask, because it's critical because we have to understand that state politics itself, the state of politics, all up to the presidential office, is for the people and by the people. So that means that everyone in the Commonwealth of America, so to speak, has a powerful say-so called a vote. Now, depending on how that vote is organized, from the individual level to the group, to the larger group, to the empowered group, to the funded group, right? To the voiceful group, depending on how that voice is mobilized, depends on to what extent or power system that they play inside the ecosystem. So you could be a church member, a part of a powerful church that has money, resources, voice, because they represent large constituency, and that large constituency then plays itself out in a powerful way in determining influence and impacting policies and decisions that are made at the local level, at the state level, or at the executive level, right? And vice versa with any other group, whether it be a corporation, a group of people, organizers, advocates, whether it be a state senator, a House of Rep, all of them can organize their power base. And that's the key to engagement, is understanding that your voice is powerful when organized effectively and with a strategy to implement change. What an effective campaign looks like. The process of growing and mobilizing a base, building power, shifting attitudes or culture, and changing policies or practices does not happen overnight. Effective campaigns analyze structural inequality and use an intersectional model of change. What it means by intersectional model of change is that we look at structural inequality and who all is impacted by structural inequality, right? What all stakeholders at that level need to be brought into the conversation, because the intersectional model of change involves all of them. It involves all of the people impacted by structural inequality. So that intersectional model of change means that all of the people, all of the issues that are impacted because of structural inequality needs to intersect together to bring about the change. Now, we need to clearly define the problem and the shared theory of change. If you remember earlier on when we said clearly define, we must define things as clearly as possible, because that means that if we know what we're dealing with, then we can develop and know how to address it. If we don't really know that there's a problem, if we don't know how many problems, if we don't know who is the problem maker, then we'll never be able to adequately, effectively address the problem. Build collective leadership. Not everyone needs to be fluent in everything, but everyone does need to be working from value-driven spaces. Everyone needs to be working from that same level, meaning that if we're working in juvenile justice and the value that we share is that children need to be loved and not jailed and imprisoned, if that's our value, then we might have problems if a question comes up and a child comes up and we say that child needs to be locked up. Because now we're not working from a value-driven, we're not working from the same shared value-driven spaces. We have a couple different values that are different from each other, right? So everyone needs to be working from value-driven spaces. We have to share values that is moving our campaign. What an effective campaign looks like? It looks strong, but flexible strategic planning, meaning that while it's strong and bold and courageous, it does understand that it needs oftentimes to be very flexible to allow room and opportunity for this or for that. And that could be a wide variety of things. For example, it could mean that we may be planning to march from the jail to the city capitol, but we may end up diverting with plan B because we may walk from the park to the city hall where we'll meet other protesters, and then we'll march to another location. You know, like it needs to be flexible to allow for opportunities for other ideas and things that need to come into play. It needs to build access to power, meaning access to power. We need to identify stakeholders. We must have access to challenge power, meaning that if there's a state law that is in our way, or if there's a municipal policy that needs to be changed, we need to identify a stakeholder who is willing to come and challenge the other stakeholders of the other power broker so that we can find a resolution, right? So that means that if it's a city council issue and one city council member has the power because maybe perhaps that city council ward 10 years ago advanced a policy that brought about how much a person will be charged downtown for public parking. And then now there's a new stakeholder that community members had said, hey, this fee is unfair. We need to have access to that stakeholder who has had access to challenge the power to say, we need to reevaluate that policy that was written 10 years ago about how much it costs to park in downtown Jackson. We need to build access to power. And we need to utilize media in sophisticated ways. We need to utilize media in sophisticated ways. That takes on a wide variety of scope. As if I said, if we had a number of people on this training, we could really get into some real groups and talk about utilizing. I would send you into a breakout session to ask you all what media ways could you get your campaign out there, right? Identify the types of ways that you would do it. Some people say, we would put out a flyer, or we would put out a 3-minute video, or we would put out a flyer and a video, or we would host online events. You know, you have to figure out ways to utilize the media and do it in a multiple sophisticated ways that catch people's attention. Tell vivid stories, right? Let people in the lives of the people you're so passionately fighting for, right? Let people in and see that. Be transparent. Be bold in sophisticated ways to use the media. Starting from a value-driven approach. We just talked about that a little bit, but let's talk about it further. When we think about the movement to end mass incarceration, what values do we hold? Justice for some or justice for all? What do we envision as our freedom dreams, right? What does that look like? When we reflect our values, what do we see as short-term and long-term wins? Like, for example, because what we're asking in this question is, are we willing to accept some measure of compromise, right? When we reflect our values, what do we see as short-term and long-term wins? Meaning that we're launching a campaign in New York, what we did, to close Rikers Island, right? The goal was to close the prison, period. There's 10 prisons on Rikers Island, including the bars. We want to close these jails, right? So what would a short-term win be? Because a short-term win would be a compromise. A short-term win would be like, we're going to close 2 jails every 5 years, right? True, it's getting toward our goal of closing Rikers Island, and it's a short-term win, does that conflict with our values? These are questions we must ask, right? Are we willing to accept that level of compromise? Some compromise is good. It's not saying that all compromise isn't good, but we must ask these questions. When we evaluate proposed legislation, we do so from how well it achieves our valued outcome. That's critical. Now let's walk this through the top to bottom. When we think about the movement to end mass incarceration, what values do we hold? Is it justice for some, or is it justice for all? What do we envision as our freedom dreams? When we reflect our values, what do we see as short-term and long-term wins? When we evaluate proposed legislation, we do so from how well it achieves our valued outcome. Very important slide to understand. Very important. Create a strategy and use it to build collective leadership. What is collective leadership? Back to basics to set a strategy. So we talk about collective leadership. Of course, we talk about the leadership that is invested in others, in which those others utilize their leadership to impact others. That is collective leadership, because then we all are moving collectively to bring about theories of change. So back to basics to set the strategy. Do your research, host community listening sessions, develop policy demands that are collective in nature and reflect the stated needs of directly impacted communities. And what we mean by policy demands is these are things that we say when we come together to do our research and we begin to build a strategy of how we're going to achieve our objectives. We say, as we do listening sessions, this is what the people want. So therefore, we demand this. These are our policy demands. We demand as a community that landlords don't discriminate against people with criminal history. We demand that. That's a policy demand. When it becomes a policy demand as constituents, meaning as people, we're saying that we demand that our local elected government write this as policy, that landlords in our city shall not discriminate against people based on criminal history. We develop a policy demand that are collective in nature and reflect the stated needs of directly impacted communities. We set baselines for what you cannot accept, right? We have to say, because we're going to set a baseline for when we want it done, right? You're saying you're going to get it on the ballot and it's going to be voted in November. Well, we're going to say set a baseline for what we're not willing to accept. We're not willing to wait till next year, 2022, when it can be added to the ballot this year, right? And we have to be willing to fight bad legislation as much as pass good legislation. Back to the basics again, legislative meetings and lobby days. We have to be prepared and willing to go to legislative meetings, to host meetings constantly with legislators, to hold lobby days, to picket outside, to go to the Capitol, to let the community know, to let the legislators know that we are constituents, that our voice must be heard. And that is the end of my slides. There should have been a conclusion slide, but that is the end of my slides. At this time, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and bring it back to the community. Is there any questions? I know I went through a lot, and I know there's only a few of us on the call right now, but for those that are on the call, is there any questions that I can answer?
I have a question.
Yes. So
what I got from this, the effectively advocating part, I'm effective not only for myself, but for my community, which is the South Side of Jackson. And I started a resource program. It's called I Got It, You Got It. And all it is just simple. If somebody has a question from something really minute to something really large, like a law, or they need a resource, They need, they can't get it by other means. I started that, and I really think the effectively advocating for our people that are illiterate, that don't have a cell phone, that don't have a laptop, that don't have internet. I mean, or don't know how to ask. I mean, some people are shy, some people pride get them, So that's what I'm working on. But how can I effectively advocate, Hakim, other than just getting a t-shirt with the South Side on the back of it and telling people, listen, I'm on social media respectfully with it. And I've had people say they'll join me. And I had people that said, you should think about what you're doing because people will take advantage of you. I'm not worried about the advantage taking. I'm taking advantage of the moment. The things we're going through with this pandemic, that people need resources. They need the information, because when we don't get the information, then we lost in the sauce, so to speak.
Yeah. I think that's the one of the first questions that a lot of people ask, and exactly why this training was developed, right? To have that kind of conversation about, what to do next, really. Like, I have a vision, I have a passion, I have a why, a reason, and what do I do next? I like to use an example, an entrepreneurial example, right? Because this level of work, community advocacy, right? Doing any kind of engagement in community is identical to entrepreneurship, to starting a business, to brand building, right? So that's why they use the word base building versus brand building. They're identical, right? Because you have to reach people the same way that you would reach people to buy your brand, to say you make popcorn, right? There's a lot of stuff you have to do, prepare and everything, to have your popcorn ready and packaged and presentable, right? And to then make a sale, to get that sale and to get a sufficient sale, because one of the keys you said is effective advocating. So you want a sufficient sale that sustains you to be able to maintain your business, to reinvest back into your business, right? So I look at it from that approach, because it's important to understand that we're dealing with people, and customer service and retail, they're the same thing. That's why you find some of the greatest leaders, right? Some of the greatest people that moved other people, right? That got people to join them, were retailers. And there's different types of retailers. The type of people that work in JCPenney, and they can talk to anybody. And you've been seeing that person at JCPenney for so long, that employee, you've been seeing them 20, 30 years. And every time you go you stop and talk to them 10, 15 minutes, right? That type of base building, right? That brand building, right? So it's the same type of thing as you begin to really develop those relationships with people, as you begin to be a source that others connect with. It's retailers, right? And remember, people who are in the streets hustling, many people who went to prison for selling drugs. These are the people that you find capable of leading churches, leading movements, right? You think about Malcolm X, right? You see what I'm saying? These are people who are capable of going out fishing. So I'm using those examples to answer your question about how do you become effective in the work that you're trying to do. First thing about all of that, all that brand building, is that it takes time. Remember, early on in this training, one of the first things it said is it takes time. It may take 30 years to get your project off. It may take somebody over there 2 years, a year. Everybody is different. And then what level of skill, what level of investment that you invest in yourself can determine how quickly you're able to have success in advocating for your campaign, advocating for your idea to get people involved. But it really is all about brand building and base building, and taking the time to invest in yourself to keep going.
Okay. Thank you, Hakim.
Definitely. Any other questions?
Thank you, Nicole and Nika, for coming. I got a quick question for Hakim. I appreciate the training, Hakim. We're gonna get this shared out. I think it was awesome. When we think about stakeholders, right, and we think about collaboration, because we often try to collaborate with our stakeholders, how do you deal with the fact that some stakeholders may be with you on one issue but against you with another issue?
Yeah, you know, to me, a good example is like this. You know how you go to a certain restaurant and they make a great meal. And in that meal is almost everything you want, but it got something in there that you just don't like. And so what do? You just pick it out. You know what I mean? Like those people that get that pizza and they got that one little item on they don't like, but they got all the other great items, and you ain't gonna throw away the whole pizza. You gonna just pick them out. So I look at it from that framework because, you know, some people like some things and don't like others. And it goes the same way with, replace the word like with support. So that means some people are gonna support one thing and be against another thing. And while you and them are together on this thing that y'all support together, they support something else that you don't support, and vice versa. You support something else that they don't support. So I look at it from that frame. We all ain't gonna agree on everything. We can be at the table at this, maybe not at that.
Any final words, Hakim?
But I definitely appreciate this opportunity. And so, you know, ever want to do this training again in the future, you know, let me know.
All right, then.
All right.
Thank you.